So finally, in this video, we're going to discuss a little bit about the host country's political legal risks. I like to think in terms of like circles of risk, and the more and more you go outside of risk, you start seeing political and legal risk. And these are things you do not have control over. You can influence or try to do something about it, but moreover, you're left to being flexible and adapting. So I recommend more than anything, just be ready, and as an outsider, always be prepared to be the outsider, and do try to limit the exposure, but you do not really have a control over the situation. So, political risk. We'll talk about a little bit about the politics of business, really, multinational influences and limitations, and the global marketer tool belt, what you can and what is available to you. So political risk is the loss when investing in a given country, whether that's fees, taxes, anything that is related to starting up could be all apply here. But there's some major types of political risk. You have ownership risk, your property and life, things that you can and cannot own. Operating risk, things, how you do things. They can tell you, like in the States, we have OSHA telling us about occupation and safety. We have other operational risks that we have to follow, such as different GAAP policies, how we can make accounting policies that measure our operating costs. So from country to country, it will vary. Other risk, of course, being just not doing your homework. So do your homework. So what does government policies do to combat this? For them, they can seize of foreign assets of a government with payment and compensation to the owners in some cases, or just confiscate entirely. We see this in Russia, happens to some of our businesses, but we've done this too. We were nowhere near clean off the slate here as a country. One of the big five, called the H.A. Henkel's company from Hawaii, was a German immigrant who happened to have some family relatives in Germany during World War I. They confiscated this gentleman's land and assets completely, who started literally just with a nickel pretty much and an acre of land, built a very big piece of business, and we stole it from him and his family and never gave it back. And then we did the same thing in World War II to other Germans and most notably to Japanese business owners. And we're still feeling the repercussions of that to this day. So taking businesses or confiscating businesses is serious business. When we do it, it should be limited in its scope entirely. And I don't think it's appropriate in almost any case. Domestication. Sometimes the government can require a transfer of ownership, as we have done with TikTok, or that China requires when owning or starting businesses in their local economy. There needs to be a predominant local business owner. So that's important to know that. Even in Germany, for example, joint stock ownership requires certain number of stockholders. So they can regulate how much ownership can happen in a country. And in our assignments, you'll see that as well, where semiconductors are becoming the next thing that Europe is falling behind on and might regulate who can own these companies. They could also have major implications. You might have to do a major shift of who you hire without any proper succession planning. So there's poor cooperation and communication. There's increased costs, poor performance at the end of the day, and a disruption to your original plans and, in effect, your dreams, I guess. But the inefficiencies are insurmountable, and anytime this happens, there's really no great outcome. Just do your best to leave it in the proper hands and do your best to keep as much control as you can. And, if you do lose it, now you have a competitor. who has everything you've done in that economy. So that's, I guess, the tough luck of going abroad. So common risks also when operating abroad is a shortage of currency. In China, there's a regulation on remuneration of currency. You cannot really just take home profits. So money stays within the local economy. So be prepared that you have to find more creative ways to do business. In some instances, for example, a German manufacturing producer, company that makes factories, goes to China to make a factory and is remunerated in the form of oatmeal or cereal. They call muesli in Germany. And that they can resell in their local market. So creative. Exchange controls are pretty bad over there as well. In China, they do not float the currency. Sometimes you have countries that are pegged to a currency, and you can have outright uncontrollable inflation. All currency issues affect how much you look profitable at home. Increase in tax rates also have major implications. California is always the first in line to raise taxes on businesses, and it makes it challenging for foreign operators to want to do business in California. Because unfortunately, our tax treaties don't really cover state and local taxes and double taxation in that sense. So you'll find that in the OECD model that I provided for you, if you're willing to read that entertaining product. Legal risk. Let's talk about the USA versus the rest of the world, in essence, the European approach, and the business regulations. So where do laws come from? How do they really start? I want to first say, we're not the only democracy out there. To think that somehow we're special is a little weird to much of the outside world. But also, we can say, though, we're bespoke. And that's okay. But so are they. And we should respect those differences. Laws come from different history, experiences, and values that accumulate over a long period of time. I had a bicycle accident in Austria and needed some legal assistance. And I went to the court on the first Tuesday of every month. The judges provide free legal services or advice. And could be the judge that will be overseeing your case if it ever does go to court. It started century plus ago when farmers from the Tyrolean towns around would come into Innsbruck and on a Tuesday to see a judge to help them out. And over time, this became a tradition that they now still provide and helped me when I was struggling with my situation, which of course was resolved. Quite a learning experience and kind of cool. So the Anglo-American approach. What is it? A lot of people tell you or will tell you what one part means to the other, but this is probably a little more elaborate. We like to base things more on case law and less on statutes. We treat like cases alike, which basically meaning precedent. And it boils down to a very different set of legal questions and legal research/analysis than what you would find in a codified legal system. But we do have laws. It's why you get a ticket for speeding or when you're jaywalking. So there are specific laws, just that if you're challenging a legal question, cases will help determine future cases. Uniform Commercial Code is one of the most codified laws in the US, superseded by contracts. It is superseded by the Contracts for the International Sale of Goods Treaty, an international treaty when you're dealing with international business. The UCC does not usually apply. And there are some key differences there. I'm not going to go into all those details. Noteworthy, though, contracts in America are just huge. We don't regulate everything, so just imagine why we think of the four corners of the contract. We let ourselves decide and minimally have government intervention. The rest of the world, for the most part, is codified, code law, Roman law, based on a comprehensive set of written statutes that spell out the rules explicitly. They do not apply cases as precedent or deciding cases from previous cases. There is a methodic approach to answering legal situations, very different than the US. But there is analysis happening, and if it's a legal question, how we answer that question, and how the courts will determine that. Then if there's a process question, or the analysis question, or say, for example, multiple people are involved, there are steps to do this, and it's quite fascinating to see it play out. The EU is slightly different. They do both case law and code law, and I had to do that at the same time when I was studying European business law. Quite cool. They have the treaties on that, and then there's cases that determine certain situations, so it's pretty cool. There's no punitive damages in most countries, especially the EU. That's an American thing. It goes against the public order, which means public safety or public protection. And so there's no unlimited legal liability. You cannot sue somebody and expect to get $30 million. That's crazy. But losers at the court pay the loser fees of their attorneys. And they're set out at standard prices. And so if you get Johnny Cochran, for example, the American great attorney, you're still going to have to pay the same fee to remunerate the other side. You don't have to worry about paying the millions. Also, a challenging situation over there is class action lawsuits. They don't really exist. There's ways to try to bundle in a way, but not really. They're still separate cases, and it's almost impossible over there. So they're still trying to figure that out, but it's history once again in its play. Also, contracts are more limited and regulated, and the form of a contract there is different than much of the Anglo world. They don't require all the 4 elements. So please listen to business law, the elements of a contract, and in a global context, remember, it may not apply in other countries. So different legal systems, different processes to process cases, very much different limitations, and also very much more challenges for the American marketer. So finally, your tool belt. What's available? What can you do when the government's changing the situation? You can ignore the prevailing rules and expect to get away with it. Probably won't. No one's perfect. You're not going to know every law, and we'll probably do something that may not be correct to the letter of the law. I am not condoning you do this, but don't worry. Risk is risk, and it's calculable and manageable. And if you make mistakes, correct and move along. But try not to violate certain things that are you just don't do that, okay? We're going to talk about that in the ethics section. Provide input to negotiators and maybe resolve the problems through multilateral negotiations. Find partners around you to help you with this. Create a local public relations team prior to your starting of your operations to start redefining issues, highlighting linkages to the benefits to legislators, lobbying them. Lobbying is a good thing. I think we think too negative of lobbying. Lobbying happens from everybody. Build local support. Nothing better than having your company start with people around you wanting you there. Have a line in the sand when it comes to ethics. There's going to be a lot of times you're pushed to do things that in your country is illegal or at your company is not allowed. Make that prevalent to them from the start and do not participate. We'll discuss some of those tactics later. Think long term, do your research, and be flexible. And hopefully you won't lose your company and you won't go to jail. That's the purpose of what we do, so behave.